Our top story this morning: in response to drone attacks against US personnel and facilities in Iraq, America has carried out airstrikes in Iran-backed militia in Iraq and Syria, which has killed at least 5 Iran-backed Iraqi militia fighters, while several others have been wounded in an attack by US warplanes. Now, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby has tweeted the Pentagon statement. The strikes came at the direction of US President Joe Biden, and these are now the second retaliatory strikes against Iran-backed militia since Biden took office. Operational and weapons storage facilities were on target at 2 locations in Syria and 1 location in Iraq. Pentagon says that the target facilities were utilized by Iran-backed militias, including Kataib Hezbollah and Saeed al-Shuhada, and engaged in unmanned aerial vehicle attacks or drone attacks here against US personnel and facilities in Iraq. Now, the Pentagon has called the strikes necessary to address the threat and appropriately limited in scope. US has reiterated that America's presence in Iraq is under the government's invitation, and it is solely for the purpose of assisting the Iraqi security forces in their efforts to defeat ISIS. And Iraqi installations housing US personnel have come under repeated attack in the recent months. US has consistently blamed Iran-linked Iraqi factions for rocket and other attacks since the start of the year. There have been more than 40 such attacks against US interests in Iraq, where 2,500 American troops are deployed as part of an international coalition to fight the jihadist Islamic State group. Now, Biden has ordered limited strikes against a target in Syria in February in response to rocket attacks in Iraq. And for more on this, we're now being joined by WION correspondent Jagriti Dave from Washington, D.C. Jagriti, thank you for joining us. Now, these are the second retaliatory strikes against Iran-backed militia since Biden took office. Now, operational and weapons storage facilities were on target at 2 locations in Syria, 1 in Iraq. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, as you say, it's the second such attack, airstrike, that the US has conducted since Joe Biden took office. Now, the purpose of these attacks, the US is saying, is as a deterrent, but many observers from the attack in February said that they weren't sure whether this was actually sufficient to stop further attacks against US personnel. So that is there has been a question mark on US action. Now, these particular strikes have been conducted in the Iraq-Syria border on facilities that have been used, as the Pentagon says, by Iranian-backed militias that the US has blamed for conducting drone strikes, drone attacks on US personnel. Increasingly, the US has believed that it is Iran-backed militias that is conducting attacks on US forces in the region. So I think this is just yet another example of the continued tensions between the United States and Iran, not just in the region. Also, we know that those talks to try to revive the nuclear deal, that's another front on which those tensions between the two nations exist.
Right, Jagriti. And also the Pentagon has called these strikes appropriately limited in scope. What does that mean going forward?
Well, I think the United States believes that these strikes are not intended to escalate a situation, that they are retaliatory and that they are defensive. So this is the language that the US is couching these against. I think the US is expecting that at some point that Iran, once they see these attacks, that the Iran-backed militias in the region will not want to escalate or conduct further attacks on US personnel. That is the aim. But as I say, there are observers and commentators who say that actually the US isn't going far enough to try to deter these militias. So we could see, the scenario where we have future airstrikes if those attacks against US personnel continue. Alternatively, we could see at some point these retaliatory strikes diminishing because the message of deterrence has got through.
Right, Jagriti. Also now, like you mentioned earlier, how do you see this impacting the talks between Iran and the United States now that the United States has taken such a defensive position?
Yes, I think the relations between the US and Iran are tense, and this is merely adding to those tensions. But I think some would argue that this is not going to massively change the dynamics of the nuclear talks, because they are already pretty fragile and pretty precarious. There is a sense that both sides want to return to that JCPOA, which President Donald Trump withdrew the US from 3 years ago. But there is also a sense that both sides are taking a pretty hard line, that Iran won't move until the US vows to remove sanctions, but the US says that they won't remove sanctions and that they want compliance from Iran in order to return to the deal. So there are some reports that suggest that the both sides are approaching some kind of agreement, but those talks that are mediated by the EU, remember the US and Iran aren't even talking directly to each other. So this is just adding yet more fragility to already difficult discussions, I think.
Right, Jagriti. Thank you so much for joining us with all those updates. We will, of course, continue to monitor this very closely.